Hey, welcome to Overtime, where we take Sunday's message further. My name is Jeremy, and I'm your host. And this is a podcast where we just want to ask the questions that we think that you would ask as it relates to Sunday's message. And as we do so, we hope that it helps you grow in your life and your faith. With that being said, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of the podcasts that are coming out. Not only that, hit the like button, because when you do so, it helps us help other people. And if you ever have a question about Sunday's content or about Overtime, you can submit those to overtime@npaustin.com, and we will be sure to get to those in future podcasts. So with that being said, here's a quick recap of Sunday, and then we're going to jump into our conversation today.
The greatest gift you could give yourself in your relationships is the healthiest version of you. When your soul is good, your relationships are good. The Lord God made all kinds of trees grow out of the ground. Trees that were pleasing to the eye and good for food. You would say, if your soul's gonna thrive, you've gotta rest. God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. God created you and I to step in to our responsibility. You are free to eat from any of the tree of the garden or any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We need rest, we need responsibility, and we need restriction. The Lord God said, "It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a suitable helper for him." There's so much research and science to how you and I are designed to be connected. So the principle says, when your soul is good, your love relationships are good.
All right, Josh, are we good? Are we going?
Are we on?
Okay. Am I interviewing you or are you interviewing me?
I think we're having a conversation.
Okay.
So no one's being interviewed. I don't think, right?
I don't think so.
Okay, we're just gonna see where this goes.
Well, neither of us spoke on Sunday, so.
No, but it was good.
Yeah, it was good.
It was really good. I was thinking, and this is gonna be, so my first church I ever worked for was a Methodist church, and then I got super into being Methodist for a minute. And John Wesley, who's the founder of the Methodist Church, says he started every meeting, every gathering, whether it was like a large group or small, with the question, how is it with your soul?
Wow.
And so I love that Buck said that. So I was going to start. You ready? How is it with your soul, Jeremy?
Oh, you're asking me right now?
Yeah.
It's Wednesday. I would say my soul is feeling good today. Feeling like it is well.
People were like,
horrible
that
hymn
sounds
church
super familiar. Joke. Well, and it's a verse.
Yeah.
I actually thought it was just a hymn.
Oh, it is well with my soul?
It is a verse, too.
Is it in Psalms? Psalms,
yes,
right?
It's a psalm.
Yeah, I've read it. It's in multiple Psalms.
Yeah, well, I was like, I learned something new, and I'm old. I was thinking, like,
yeah.
Aren't most hymns just verses put to music? Psalms put to music?
But some are more original. Some are taken straight out of Scripture. Some are more original writing.
I mean, I don't know the history of all the hymns ever.
Yeah.
Oh, well. What is a theology degree even worth?
I know.
Jen?
That's so weird. They didn't cover that.
Yeah.
But I do think, what I loved about, like, we're kicking off this series of love handles, and Buck starts it off with, I think, a question we actually don't ask often, but it is the foundation of not just dating relationships and marriages, but also, like, even friendships and work dynamics. Like, I mean, even just making a life decision, before I make a parenting decision, like, am I actually checking in and saying, like, okay, so I'm making this decision starting from where? Because this is the starting point for everything. So it's like, I'm having this meeting starting from where? I'm having this conversation starting from where? So I loved the question.
Yep.
So I wanted to be all, like, super serious right out of the gate.
Yep.
But your soul's fine.
Yeah, my soul feels good. I would say if you asked me yesterday, I'd be like, it's pretty restless. But I had like a good morning.
Okay.
Good time with family last night, and it felt like it replenished some of those things. So, and I had a good time with friends. Josh, one of those. We had a little guys' night Monday night, and so those are like soul-filling things.
Okay, guy time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like where you laugh and you just have a good time, and
Okay.
You say things that.
That we'd like to repeat. Would you
Nope.
like to?
Nope.
Okay.
Nothing.
All right.
Yeah, nothing that we want to repeat on a public podcast. So, there you go.
All right. Well, let's start off with something just about. Okay, I have a question.
How's your soul?
Oh, my soul.
Yeah, you can't get out of that.
Yeah. In general, good. I am reading a really, really good study with my Wednesday small groups. That's been good. I mean, good is in the sense like I hate it because it's actually exactly what I need.
It's helpful, but
right?
it means it's convicting.
Yeah,
you
it's
deal with
almost
stuff.
like God is actually talking through it and trying to adjust my behavior and my responses. So that's
Ugh,
super
I
annoying.
hate
I
that.
would much prefer to behave the way that I'd like to behave. But
Yep.
but today's probably a little, I feel like I'm in a season, probably just the next couple of weeks, because I have a huge work project that is like, I don't have enough time in the day. So
Yeah.
I don't know that I would say the word restless, but definitely all right, like take a deep breath, because otherwise I'm going to bring that franticness into every situation. So I was glad that you prayed before we started.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, good
Yep.
idea.
Sweet.
Yeah. All right. Let's start with just like a goofy relationship question.
Okay.
Worst date ever.
Worst date ever. Oh, this came to mind instantly. So
Okay.
it was with my wife. And I grew up working the kettle corn business that my parents owned.
Okay.
And
I think I've heard this.
Yep.
Yeah.
So they paid me pretty well as a teenager, and it was all cash. So depending on how successful the festival was at the time, I think I was like, $10, $12 an hour cash. And then when I started driving the trailers, they started paying me a lot more than that, because they wouldn't have to do anything. I would just drive the trailer downtown. I'd work it. And I was 16, 17 years old. Work it on 6th Street, drive the trailer back, clean it all up, be done. And so they paid me pretty well. So I was like making good money as a teenager. And then I started dating this cute girl, and I'm like, okay, this is awesome. Like, I'm going to surprise her with this date. So I took her to, what is it called? Cool River Cafe, which is somewhere on Palmer, if it's even still there. I mean, that was a while ago now, but it was like super nice. And I was in like a t-shirt, and
you didn't
it was
know the
terrible.
niceness.
And then also I ended up spending like $50 a plate for this meal, which now I'm like, oh my gosh, that is so much money. What was I thinking? And Ashley was just like, you're dumb. I'm not impressed. This is stupid. Why are we here? Pretty like, and she might have said those words verbatim. Now she would say those words for sure. But I could tell she was just like uncomfortable.
Yeah,
She's like, why are we doing this? Like, we should have just gone to Chick-fil-A.
Yeah.
And like, that would have been a way better. It was Valentine's Day. And I was like, I'm
you
going
were
to go.
like you were going all out.
Yep. And so that was and then I remember leaving the restaurant going like, why isn't this working? I thought this
the
was
nicer
like
the
a nice
restaurant,
thing
the better
to do.
the date. Yeah.
Yeah, but it didn't work out super well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was my horrible date story.
Okay.
Do you have one?
I do not have a horrible date story. I have horrible moments in front of guys. I have horrible moments with men, but like not like an actual official date. I think the one that, and I hate this is the one that comes to mind, but I can't like shake it, is I did like this like season of going like to clubs, which I know is probably like hilarious.
Sorry.
It's already bad.
Oh, keep a straight
already
face.
bad. Don't, Josh, no, do not come.
Hang on, wait. Sorry.
Yeah.
Josh, if you're going to be the guy that intermittently comes in, you better come in.
Yeah.
Like disco clubs or what?
First of all, I was born at the tail end of disco.
Okay.
So no, like club, like you can find me in the club. Dun, 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 dun. Anyway, like it's like club, like what you would
50
picture.
Cent.
Yeah, fitty.
Fitty, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jen.
Get it? So it was downtown Nashville. It's called the Mix Factory, and we went. And I don't know why this is like the worst moment I can remember. Is like I'm out on the floor, and this guy comes up. He's like, "You want to dance?" And we're dancing. And I think he's like decently cute, but I just remember he just like leans over to me about halfway in the song, and he's like, you can just like, you can spank me now. And I was like, I didn't know, like I was so in shock, and I was like, I'm not into that. Like, I mean, so I'm gonna go. And I went and got my friend, and I was like, you can dance with her. And anyway, it was a whole.
You
it was
threw
a
your
whole
friend
thing. We
into
danced
that.
for a minute. No, neither of us were into it. We both we didn't know what to do. We were in such shock. We were so uncomfortable. So that's like my worst moment. And it wasn't really a date because we ran. But that's like my worst moment.
And there have been multiple moments like that in your life?
I went to like a pool party with a guy.
You don't have to go into them, but I just wow.
Anyway, just like those kind of moments. I don't think I had like a moment with Sal. I've had embarrassing moments, but not like on a date.
Okay.
So next week we'll have another.
Yeah,
getting to know
that is. We're
Jeremy and
definitely
Jen.
going to do.
I feel like I learned so much just now.
Yeah. This
So anyway,
wow. Okay.
yeah.
Very insightful podcast. Beginning to
this
the podcast.
will now be shared globally. Okay, so anyway, I thought it'd be funny to start off with something like just normal, because everybody's had a bad date.
Yeah.
Right, and some people have had really bad relationships. Right, like so, and one of the things that I think that we're hoping to make sure and say throughout the series, not just from stage, but even here, is that there's no way, like, relationships are so unique. yet also kind of similar in some ways, right? But like that we can't cover every base in these conversations, right? Because while I had like a stupid moment on a dance floor, some people have had really difficult moments in relationships. So this whole idea of like giving love handles that help us regardless of kind of where we are, what we've been through, I think is really good.
Yep. And dating is changing a lot too. Seems like every decade the landscape of dating is changing to the point that I think I'm pretty rare in meeting a high school sweetheart and marrying her, like, you know, in the 21st century. Like that doesn't seem like it happens nearly as often as it used to.
Yeah.
And you know, you hear about people getting married when they're 35, 40 years old, and it's like, okay, now I'm done with that season of my life and moving on to this one. Like it's just totally different landscape every decade, it feels like.
Yep. And it's hard. I mean, I think that I was talking to someone about online dating and like how that's changed so much. Even when I was dating and it was just beginning, that was kind of a scary world. And then now it's like, no, I mean, how else am I going to meet someone that, I'm not going to, have already kind of gotten out of the structures and systems that are automatically in place to date, like a high school or a college experience.
Yep.
Like that's a way to meet someone. You can actually filter fairly well now. And so it's interesting. So the landscape of dating has changed. The landscape of marriage has changed.
Yeah.
The way that we understand and relate to, those dynamics, and even just our whole culture has shifted in that regard. So I think these love handles, one, I think it's super important to pay attention to what are probably some of the most, but really ultimately is probably the most important relationship that we have while we're here, our physical relationship with our spouses, right? Mm-hmm. But also everything we're going to talk about, I think, is going to apply to every relationship in some capacity.
Yep.
Right? Like Buck's question, the ultimate love handle for this week was, how is it with your soul? It's like, well, that works across the board. So one of the things that he talked about was making sure that your soul is nourished, basically. Like what feeds your soul? I think he broke down 4 categories, but I just thought we'd start with like a general for you, like what feeds your soul? You said something. You said last night you had some guy time and you had some time at home with Ashley, and like, so what feeds your soul?
Yeah, well, I think, and I'll just reiterate too, sorry, I'm going back to something you said a second ago, and then I'll answer that question. Just, I think God wants us to have great relationships. I mean, God is relational. Like he demonstrated that through the person of Jesus, and relationships are just like such a fabric of our lives, that when our relationships aren't working, there's a whole lot of other things that fall out of place as well. We don't find a lot of people who have horrible relationships and are living a great, happy, fulfilled life.
Yeah, great point. Yeah,
and I think that is true of both all relationships, and then more in love relationships, romantic relationships as well. Like when marriage is working and it's in sync, like it's just this like beautiful soulish thing that I've experienced in my short time being married so far, And so I think that's just an important point. Like God wants you to have great relationships. And while the landscape changes between dating and marriage, a lot of the tools and a lot of the things we're talking about here, these are like human principles. Like these transcend time. And it's why when Jesus spoke about, things or writings in the New Testament, they're still so relevant today, is because they're just human things, they're brain things. And so I just want to reiterate that. That's a big thing. I just want people to walk away with, like, God wants you to have a great relationship with your spouse or your partner or your dating, whatever it might be.
No, and that's huge, because I think we live in a system in our culture that says, but if you have all the stuff and you've done all the things and accomplished all the things, that will get you somewhere. And it's like, man, but if your relationships are dramatic and tense and they're not safe, and you can't fully show up as you, then you're going to be miserable. And like, I think what Buck was saying, his son was like, but if I can get a yacht, then I've arrived. It's like, you can have a yacht and a miserable marriage.
But you might be the only one on it.
Well, and even thinking like, we're in a season of life with our boys, right, where college is the conversation. And so I noticed, especially my younger son, like figuring out which school to go to. And I'm like, oh, dude, like you can transfer schools. It's who you marry that you really need to be thinking about. I'm like, school will figure itself out, and you can change. Even if it takes you an extra year, you can figure that out. Yeah. But man, paying attention to who you're dating and who you marry is, to me, what really is going to determine a big portion of your life, right?
Yeah, it's the biggest decision you'll ever make, apart from whether or not Jesus is your Savior.
Yep. Yes, absolutely. And when you have children with someone, that's a forever relationship, right? Because even if they grow up to be adults, you're still grandparenting, right? There's always a connection. Yep. So, I think that's a really good point. We're made to be in a relationship, but also that it's going to be woven into everything that we do.
And this is not a Jesus. I always go back to Ray Dalio. He started Bridgewater Investments, and he writes a book called Principles. And it's really just, he wrote principles his whole life. It's like a modern day non-religious book of Proverbs.
Oh, cool.
It's very interesting. Yeah. And it's really long and it's really in depth. And he just has principles that are like Proverbs for all these different experiences in his life. But he boiled everything he's ever experienced down to two things that you want to go for in life: meaningful work and meaningful relationships.
Oh yeah,
And
that
he
makes
said
so much sense.
those two things are the most important. If you have those, doesn't matter how much money you have, all that, like, you can live the same amount of happiness. Now, of course, it comes from a billionaire who says that, and we're always like, well, you don't know what you're talking about. But like, everybody who gets to the top always ends up saying, well, that's not really what it's about. It's about these two things: meaningful work, meaningful relationships.
Which is interesting. I mean, because like you said, he's writing his own kind of proverbs, but that's actually literally what I feel like, and I'd have to like pull up Genesis right now, but that's almost the first two things God gives mankind: meaningful work, and a meaningful relationship.
Yeah.
And it's like, that makes so much sense. Like, we're put to work pretty quickly. We're like, hey, go take care of the animals, go manage this. You have dominion over here. We're given responsibility and work pretty soon. And we're given relationship pretty quickly. It's not good for you to be alone. Let me put you in a relationship. And so that's really cool.
Yeah, I've just found that super fascinating, super non-religious. But back to the soul.
Okay.
We talk about things that feed our soul.
Yes.
What was your question with the soul?
So he breaks it down. Meaningful work, actually, he talks about that work. He starts with rest. Buck started with rest and with work and responsibility. With restriction, right, that choice is a part of a part of your soul being healthy and a part of a meaningful relationship. And with community, right? And so I don't know if we want to chat about all four of those, or which one kind of stood out to you most. Like, is there when he says, hey, in order to feed your soul, you're going to need to be at rest. It's funny when Buck mentioned, like, maybe you need to take a nap. I could hear someone, I don't know who it was, so I don't feel like I'm writing anybody out, but like someone I was sitting in the congregation with Sunday, like, they said, oh yeah, right, like, that'd be nice. And I just had this thought, and I agree with that sentiment, because I was like, yeah, I want a nap all the time, right?
Right.
But if we don't have margin in our life to take like a power nap, or we don't have margin in our life, that our first response to the thought of rest is, yeah, that'd be nice, I wish. We may need to like look at what's on our plate and reprioritize, because I do think rest looks different for different people. If you're sitting at a desk all day, it might look like going out and hiking, right? We've talked about that before with this principle, but I do think rest is something we can easily. I think there's a phrase some people use, like, I'll sleep when I'm dead.
Yep.
And it's like, but you're missing nourishing your soul, and then in turn nourishing your relationships.
And how many romantic relationships thrive when there's one person who's living with a restless soul?
Yeah.
I don't think very many, because that restless soul is going to get all over the other person that you're trying to do life with. And that's why I think I love these four from Judah Smith that he talked through. And I feel like these have shown up in different ways for me in different seasons of life. I would say the last year has been a focus on the rest side of things. And I think I've shared some of this on the podcast, that when we found out we were having Grayson, I went out and asked a lot of men in my life, what would you go back and tell your, young father self if you could go back and do it over? And it was all related to time and presence, and just don't miss it. It's going to go so fast. And it absolutely has. But one of the things that I was grateful for that I learned from those guys is like, okay, if our default system of culture is set up to get the default system of results that we're getting, then we need to do something differently than what we're naturally default going to do.
Yeah.
And so, for the last year, in 2022, because we're in 2023, Ashley and I, we focused on like a day off a week, and it became this like really good thing for our souls, where we didn't do it perfect, and we went like a month without having a day and stuff, and that happened, but it was always the goal. And so it was really significant for us. So I would say, like, as I'm looking at like soul things that were fed for me and how it impacted my marriage and my relationship with Grayson, and I think that's the big one for me seasonally that has like stuck out.
Sal and I had a season. I worked for a church, right? So I was off on Friday and Saturday, and then his office did a pilot of like flex time, and so he had every other Friday off, and that day became so precious, right? Like, and I think then when the company was like, yeah, that pilot didn't work, we felt it. Yeah, you feel it once you. And I love the point you made on all these things. If we do default, if we just go in like autopilot, right, with whether it's our personality or what culture says about rest, work, choices, or community, and we just go on autopilot, like, we're not going to get the results that we want. And so in order to go against something, that's going to create a little bit of tension. So I would imagine in that rest, like, I've even observed, like, you've been so good about that. Like, there's been times that I've reached out to you and you're like, hey, I'm taking my Sabbath today, or hey, I'm resting today, I'll get back to you as soon as I can, which is never an issue. But I think giving yourself permission to do that.
Sure.
And thinking like,
it's difficult.
Oh, it's so hard, right? And so I think that's one thing if you really want a vibrant soul, to say, okay, God, what is not natural for me? What is, and I'm kind of numbing out in other ways, as opposed to pushing against and fighting for that rest a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's Judah Smith that said it or Buck, but I love the quote, cease from doing the necessary.
Yeah, that's Buck. I've always heard Buck say that.
I love that.
Yep.
Like if you were like, what is rest? Cease from doing the necessary.
Yeah, and we need to do a lot of things.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yep.
Yep, absolutely. I've always heard him say that one, and that one's stuck with me for sure. What about for you, as you think about like work and responsibility and soul being fed, work? You don't work at a church anymore, so yeah.
Well, it's funny because you and I were in a conversation yesterday about like that there should be a podcast just for people who work at churches, because it is a weird.
It's a different world.
It is a different world. It's not better or worse. It's just different. I mean, I also have never worked in a hospital, which I'm sure is a different world. It has a different language. But
it's funny you say that, because when Julie came to work on staff at Northpoint, she was like, "Why are you guys so stressed out? Like, this is way less stressful than," because she was a labor and delivery nurse.
Yeah.
And so she was like, "This doesn't hold a candle." to
Yeah. My current boss is a retired Green Beret, and so we were in a meeting yesterday, and my coworker and I were just stressing out about all this stuff we had to get done for this project, and we were probably overstressing. But he was like, "Can I just?" And you could tell he didn't want to do it, but then he just felt like he had to go. "Can I just put this in perspective? Bullets are not flying at us." Like, because he's literally been in situations where bullets are flying at him. And we're going, "Oh my gosh, I don't have this person's logo." You know? So it is all perspective a little bit. But I've always worked. And so I think, but I don't know that I've always explored the idea of meaningful work. Right. And so, in taking on responsibility probably that were others versus what God wanted me to do in that season. And I think that will rob your soul, right? When I pick up your work and don't do my work, or I'm comparing work as opposed to, okay, God, what do you have for me today? I think I have always struggled in that regard. I do know, like, Sal and I know we make a lot of jokes about me being seasoned or old, but we are already talking about retirement. Like, we're thinking about that, saving toward that, having those conversations. And we have such different perspectives, because I'm like, oh, cool, I'll be able to volunteer more and do different, like, and he's like, I am not going to do a thing. He says that now. But also we've had conversations about, like, just like Buck said, but a couple weeks in, right? Like, really, it's not about amount of work or pay for work. It is about finding something for your hands to do, right?
Yep.
You need to put your mind and your body toward something, and you're made, same thing with the relationship, same thing with rest. You're made to need rest, you're made to need relationship, and you're made to work. So I think that figuring out what work actually feeds your soul is different. And all work will have an element that doesn't feed your soul. So I think it's unrealistic to think.
Sure.
Obviously, Jeremy and Jen said, like, you should, like, have work that feeds your soul. So I don't enjoy, like, I don't know why the fax machine is the first thing that came to my head. Because
I think of Expensify.
What is that?
Expensify is like our coding, how we code all of our expenses so that it goes to the right place.
Like a QuickBooks kind of thingy?
Yeah. Each staff member has to do it every week, and if you don't do it, then you get called out, and you got to do Expensify. And so that's like our, like, oh my gosh, Expensify kind of thing.
Yep. Now so I'm reading a book right now called Practicing the Presence of God. It's by Brother Lawrence. It's an old book. It's really tiny, really easy read. But it's this, he was in the military, and then he was like did some clerical work for the church, then he became a monk. And his whole journey was finding God in every element of work, especially the work he didn't want to do.
Yep.
So it's been interesting to read the way he does that.
Yep.
So, I mean, I'm saying, like, find work that's meaningful to your soul, but maybe the idea would be more like, have conversations with God about finding the meaning in your work.
Yep.
Even more than finding this perfect job.
Right. And I would point to another reference to a resource. Jeff Henderson has a lot of great stuff on work and, like, kind of theology and spirituality of work.
Yeah.
He did a series called Dream Job. You could probably just find it on YouTube if you search Dream Job, Jeff Henderson. And then he also, he just came out with a book called What to Do Next. And it's about, like, preparing for whatever next season of life that one has
cool.
vocationally.
Yeah.
It's really great. I mean, he's one of my, he taught here at Northpoint one time, like, years ago. But he's the one who started the whole 4 idea.
Yeah.
That like, many churches have adopted. So he, like, was one of the first pioneers of that whole concept. The 4 Gwinnett was the first one. And then it just spread like wildfire. So now there's 4, lots of cities. So But he's just great because he was high up. He was a Chick-fil-A marketing executive. He worked marketing for Atlanta Braves, and then he was lead pastor, launched 2 churches, and now he's just doing his own thing, writing his own resources, that
Very
kind of
cool.
stuff. So very interesting guy, and I'd highly recommend looking up his stuff on work for someone. Specifically, I say this from experience because I've been on the other side of a friend whose father would come home from work and you could just tell that he like wasn't alive. Like work just beat him down every single day. And so, I growing up, I watched this father kind of, just work was this thing like, oh, like you can't talk to dad when he gets home because he's been beaten down. He has nothing left in him. And it was true in his kids and his marriage. And I just, I hated it because it created this mentality that like, work is this thing that you have to do, and it's to beat you down and make your life miserable.
Yep.
And that's not really in line with the way God designed work, and that's not in line with how our souls should be fed by work. It's okay to go home very tired, and it's okay to drive home exhausted. Like I think about driving home from like Christmas Eve services here at Northpoint. I am exhausted. Like I just go straight to the couch, but my soul is filled up.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit different. So
well, and I do think there's and we just culturally do that pendulum swing, right? So if you were like, I was a latchkey kid because both my parents worked, and so if I wasn't in daycare my whole life, after school, when I was old enough to go home alone, I was home alone. So there's this pendulum swing though that we do where we're like, oh well, I don't want that. I don't want to be the father that isn't. So no, I don't work. I had a friend who was like, I'm going to stop working. I was like, how's that going to work?
Yeah.
And he was like, well, I'm just going to, kind of write on some systems that'll support us because time's too short to not spend time with my family. And I'm like, I don't know how that's going to pan out. Well, over months, after a couple months, it got a little tight. Well, we don't need stuff. Okay, well, yes, this is true. And then his wife was like, Christmas is coming. So she went and took like a 3rd shift at like a retail store so she could get some stuff for the kids for Christmas. Like it was like the pendulum went the whole other way with the generation. So I just don't know how like we have to figure out like, okay, it's not here and it's not here. But really it's going to be different places in each of our lives for different seasons, but not wanting to run the total opposite direction every time.
And bringing it full circle to love handles relationships. If work is not in a good place in our soul, it's going to come out on the people. Again, the greatest thing we can bring the other person is the healthiest version of us, and work and rest both play a role in that.
Absolutely. I think we've talked before on this in our conversations about also there's some things you can do. We have some counselor friends that have specific techniques when they're coming home from work that they leave work with work, right? One guy has like hangers that he puts like up on a coat rack that represents the different clients he saw. I have a friend who has a doormat that wipes her feet, and she's like, I'm not bringing this into home. So there are some real tangible ways I think we can tell our body, I'm shifting from work to home, and I think that will make a difference too.
Yeah, those are great ideas.
Yeah, just real easy things you can, I think, and just try it. If it doesn't work, you can stop doing it.
Yeah.
And go right back to bringing your work back in the house. But
yeah. And I think one more thing on work too. Culturally, I think we have a tendency to, especially with the post-COVID world where everybody's working from home and like it's so flexible, like we're going to design our work lives to be as comfortable as possible. But what I think I've noticed, and this is just personal observation as I look at kind of my landscape of people that I bump into, is that comfort and flexibility has come at the expense of significance and meaning in my work. And so like I will pursue the most comfortable work scenario I possibly can.
Okay.
And because I'm gonna maximize time with my family, which is a great goal. But then why do I hate work still? Because
that's a great point.
You've lost meaning. You've lost that like intention. Hard work is like good for the soul.
Yeah.
Being exhausted after a good day of work feels good.
Yeah.
And if you're just trying to pursue comfort all the time, then you're going to miss out on some of those really significant soul-filling work type moments.
Yeah. And I think identifying those, like take note of that. Slow down enough to know like, man, at the end of that day, that I felt good.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean like we did with all the limb pickup stuff. We did a big day Saturday. We'll do another one Saturday of picking up limbs and stuff. And I was like, I love a chainsaw. I have discovered like I could literally, I'm not obviously going to do that for a profession for so many reasons, but at the end of the day, it was like, man. And so that could be a rest for me.
Yeah.
Like, what does that look like to incorporate?
By next winter, Jen, where did all of your trees go?
I mean, I'm just like, it was really awesome. And I didn't want Sal took the tall one on the pole with like the tiny chainsaw. I was like, oh, no. I want the big. He's like, please be careful. I'm like, I'll be fine.
That's awesome.
And I survived. But, the other thing that Buck, went down through, so we're talking about rest, responsibility, and he landed also on restriction, right? And I use the word choice a ton. It's really the same thing. Now, choice has a more positive connotation because it feels like I'm giving you options. But with every choice comes a restriction. If I say yes to this, I have to say no to that, right? So I love that he built that into our soul, because I think that, again, that pendulum, we have gone to everything's permissible as to, but we're swung over there because nothing was okay for so long, right? And so I love this idea of like, actually restriction is good and choice is good, and it's like vital to all relationships. No one wants to be stuck with someone else. But I do think that one of the things I thought of while he was sharing was, we forget sometimes, we talk about using our yes wisely, and the Christian culture definitely has been on a wave of like, make sure you're saying no to more. It's like, but you also need to use your no wisely, right? It's both. That I love when Jesus says in Matthew, he's like, let your yes be yes and your no be no, because they both have power and they're equally weighted. So if I say yes to everything, I'm going to be anxious and overwhelmed. If I say no to everything, I'm going to be isolated. So like, how do you do that? How do you monitor your own restriction and choice in terms of like checking yourself?
Well, it's very different for me being in a season with young kids, and I'm surrounded by people who don't have kids, or kids are going off to college. And so for me, it's like, I feel like I'm a little bit of the oddball out right now. Not surrounded, in work, vocationally surrounded by people. I've got now, just in the last like 6 months, we've got this community of people who also have little kids. And so it feels much more relatable of like, hey, you want to go grab a beer? Well, here's what that means.
That entails.
It's not as easy as it used to be. So I think from a restriction standpoint, for me, it's just like pre-deciding what you're going to say yes or no to is really important. And I also think, let's see, how can I briefly go through this? But like Michael Hyatt has this thing, and he's a leader, entrepreneur, book writer, podcast, all the yada stuff. And he has this thing that he calls life accounts, and it's recognizing that we each have an account of energy and time and money to spend. And most of us can't have more than like 7 to 9 accounts depending on capacity. So like for me, I know I have my accounts written down, and I look at my accounts, and it's, account number 1 is God, account number 2 is me, because I know that if I don't give a healthy version of me to the people in my life, then it's not going to go well. Account number 3 is Ashley, account number 4 is Grayson and future kids, account number 5 is Northpoint, and then 6, 7, and 8 are like work, play, and finances, or community, play, and finances. So I know that like if something doesn't fit into one of those accounts, it's probably not going to work out very well, and it's not a priority in my life. And so
you have those written down.
I love
that.
And that's where like for me, like goal setting, and this is nerdy stuff, but goal setting is like looking at which one of those accounts like needs attention each year, and going like, I'm going to give attention to this account because I want to put some goals here. So like for us, one of our big goals this year is, we've got some like financial things we're trying to figure out. And so that's like, we're putting energy and goals there, and because that's an account that needs like energy. So that's, I don't know, for me in terms of restriction, that's very helpful from a time standpoint, because it helps me go like, this doesn't fit in any of those accounts. So like, it's probably a no-brainer. And I've got dreams and things I'd like to do, but I know I cannot say yes to those without losing energy or time spent in one of these other accounts. And is it worth the cost of that energy and time? That's a really important question to ask when you're thinking through these things.
I love that. That's huge. That's so easy to do, right? And practical, and maybe it's hard to get disciplined probably to check in with the accounts and like have an honest, clear view of them. But I'm sitting here even hearing you, and I'm thinking, okay, so Jen, what would your accounts be? And how would you? And I know my personality, and I would be like, okay, so each account, if I have 5 accounts, each, like I would want them each, and it doesn't work. Life doesn't work like that.
Right.
And so I think even just the exercise of writing my accounts, having honest conversations with myself, and maybe even with Sal about like what's actually happening and where are they actually, and what does this year hold, or even breaking it the next 3 months hold. Because sometimes I get overwhelmed with like a work project or a thing, and I feel like, no, I'm just, there is a light at the end, right? This isn't forever. Or even like in parenting right now, I'm like, oh God, it's like a lot in so many ways, but there is going to be a different season that does come. So right now, trying to make sure that gets priority. I love that idea of just writing that out. That's huge. And maybe seeing where you're not restricting yourself enough, and where you need to give yourself different boundaries and choices and stuff. I love that. That's really good.
The humbling thing about it is like you very quickly realize how finite you are and how little time you have. Because when you add up all the important things in your life, you're like, I don't have a lot of time for the other stuff. And that's like,
Yeah.
that's a bummer, because you want to, I think about Bob Goff. Bob Goff just bugs me sometimes. I love him so much, but his whole win of being like super available, I'm like, I don't know would he write the same book with like young kids? I don't know if he would.
Okay, well, let's argue.
Okay.
I mean, discuss.
I'd love to,
Because his
I
quote,
struggle with this.
because I think I don't know if it was a Sunday or an Inside Out message, but I used his quote about being available, and it has stuck with me. And I have, like, part of my prayer, in my insecurities, I go into, like, I go inside, right? And so I just would like to ostracize everyone. So especially if I'm hurt or I'm fearful or have any anxiety around something, I retreat. And so being available actually is very not normal for me. But then when I can go to the opposite direction, be too available. So anyway, what I say is, like, it's funny you mentioned it, because I've really been trying to sit with that idea of, like, I don't want to be available. I want to be available to you. I want to be available to others, like whatever I can do. The trick I think is slowing down enough to actually see if you are available, because it doesn't mean being available. Does that make sense?
Sure,
what I'm saying?
sure.
Like, so, like, when I'm thinking, when the boys were little, I would have been less available, but I could have still been available. So I'm not at full throttle available,
Right.
but I can still be available. And
Yeah.
then sometimes we talk ourselves out of being available.
No, for sure.
Right?
I
We're like-
would be very guilty of that.
Yeah, we're like, I've got too much, so I'm going to do nothing, or I've got too much, so I can't respond to this.
Yep.
And just asking to slow down, like, hey, I can't commit to that without sitting with it for a minute. Like, hey, I'm interested in that, but let me see what that actually looks like played out, and kind of project it a few months down the road. So I'm not going to say I think definitely you're going to be less available because you're in a different season,
Yep.
but it doesn't mean you're not available. And I
Yep.
think the key with all this stuff, right, the yes and the no and the meaningful work, is it all gets submitted to Christ, right? Like, we're like, hey, God, like, you help me see this, because if I'm trying to see it in my own self, by myself, without good community around me, without people to help me see, and without getting some time of stillness, I'm going to say I am or am not available.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
Because I've had the same conversation about Bob Goff. Now, he is wildly available.
Yeah. Yeah, he's very, very available.
Yeah, in bizarre ways. But
Yep.
he's also very resourced. There's also a difference in that.
Very resourced.
Resourced and available are two different things.
Yep. He
Because-
fails to mention the resource side
Often.
quite often.
He's
He's
like,
like, I was a lawyer for like
Yes.
4 or 5 decades, and I never lost a case.
Yep.
And you're like, you're
in
pretty
San
ro-
Francisco.
Yeah, and
So-
he lives, because he talks about his view from his house in San Diego often of the bay, and you're like, okay,
I think
different
this guy's
worlds.
got some, but
Yeah.
available and resourced are different. But all of it, like your time, and all your resources are limited, right? Like even your energy,
Mm-hmm.
because we are a species, so like we can only live off what we can
Right.
take in, right? And
Right.
so, but I think we're more. Different personalities will tend to make themselves more available or not, right?
Yep.
And so I don't know why I feel like sometimes I think we're so overwhelmed, and I just look at things, I'm like, what's actually happening?
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Like, so I would say with littles or not, like, just slow down enough to say, I can be available, but this may be all that I can be
Yep.
available with.
Well, that was one of the things I wrestled with this weekend, like, all the ice cleanup, all the storm stuff. Like,
Yes.
I was like, man, I should get out there and do stuff. But I also knew I had a crazy work week. Saturday was the only day I would be able to, like, give Ashley any
Yep.
help, and then I'm back, work again on Sunday. And I knew I was working into the afternoon on Sunday, even past Sunday morning. And so I was like, I'm here to help my family this weekend. But I
Yes.
struggled with it, because I was like, I want to be this Bob Goff guy that's like available and jumps out, and you know what I mean? It's just, it's so difficult to like gauge that sometimes.
So I think, like, for that example, because Sal and I had that conversation, we needed to get our yard done. We had no clue what pickup was going to be like in our area. And
Yeah.
but we felt bad. Like, actually, Friday afternoon, it was still icy and cold. And I looked out our window, and like a bunch of men in our neighborhood were out there, like, doing neighborly things. And Sal was still on a work call because he was working from home. And I was like, he got off. I was like, well, you need to get out there. And he was like, well, what? And I was like, he's like, I just got off a work call. And he's like, and they said it's about to start raining, which it did. But anyway, I was like, but look, all these men in the neighborhood. He's like, but they have different jobs than me.
Yeah.
They have different schedules than me.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, but don't you feel like we're being terrible? And he's like, well, why don't you go out there? And I was like, there's no women out there. And then lo and behold, my neighbor, his wife comes out. I'm like, dang it. But like, I think, like, slow down enough to say, okay, so what's actually happening? Like, okay, maybe I can take care of my family and then give an hour.
Yep.
I don't have to give 12 hours.
Yep.
So, but also people who tend to be able to do all the things for all the people sometimes have to check, why am I doing all the things for other people, and what account? Like, I love your idea of these accounts. Like, what account is being taken from. Because if my wife doesn't feel seen or validated, but all my neighbors do.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, you didn't necessarily win
you
potentially.
didn't win.
Yeah.
You know? So the other one that Buck covered was community, right? Talking about how Judah Smith says that community is one of the ways that our souls get nourished. I think Northpoint especially does a really great job of kind of driving this home. If you haven't heard about groups, I don't know where you've been.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
and Buck has referenced like the blue zones that are actually pockets. This isn't just church and theology. This is science. Like, you are better when you're in community, and community is one of those things where we feel like we don't have availability for, and that's a big rub.
Well, and that goes back to like defaults in culture. Like, our default, to have the house and to have the things and to have the vacate, like all of it means we have to work a lot. So then, we're not as available. And then our kids need to be successful. So they need to be in every single thing. And so blah, 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 blah. And so it stacks up to, we don't have availability if we follow kind of the default, kind of pull of just the world and society and culture and everything. But what we forget is that what the default was industrialization was tribe mentality. So like being known and being in these cultures and these communities, like, your grandfather was like the elder of this thing. And so, it's just, and you couldn't go anywhere. I heard this on a podcast this morning. You couldn't like leave and run and move to a different city and start your life over. Like, it just didn't work that way.
Yeah.
These are the people you had to do life with to survive. And so you work things out and you figure it out and you live in community together, even if when it gets uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And so I just think, the podcast I was listening to was referencing this Jewish, man, I'm going to butcher it though, but it was about when you steal something from someone. It's in one of the old books of the Old Testament. You have to like go give back a bunch, and you have to like, do you know what I'm talking about? No, I thought going to Bible school you'd be like, oh yeah,
tooth, which I think we don't do much anymore.
No, but this was even the opposite. It was like, when you steal something from someone, now you need to go pay back double what you stole, and because it was so relationship like based, you have to go reconcile that relationship.
Yeah. How you handled each other as a people, and you saw each other as a people. You saw each other as a group, which is as our world becomes, and I don't mean this like even like in the political sense, but like as we become more secular, meaning like just like faith and church just can tend to feel not as relevant and like
post-Christian.
Yeah, we just sort of like, this is not the way to go anymore. But what's funny is like the results of that are going to be, we don't have tribes, right? And we think, I had a friend who was at my last church, and he never, claimed to be a Christian. He actually always was pretty staunch as an atheist. But he said, I tried to join these other atheist groups, and I just never found community. It's like they were just sitting over here talking. They talked a ton. That doesn't mean that there aren't groups out there in the world that are strong like that.
Right,
but like,
right.
The reality is when we decide to do life in a community where we're refined, especially when we do community like with people who we don't always necessarily like, we're not all on the same page, but we're going to make a commitment to each other. We have something that unites us, so we focus on that rather than the things that we aren't necessarily aligned on. So
yeah, I had a friend say
huge.
something similar too, when he was a part of our community group, and then he was self-professed, didn't believe the things we believed, and he was like, but where can I find this somewhere else?
That's right.
And it's like, our culture's not designed that way.
No, and we try, and I don't think that, maybe someone will unlock the code at some point, but like it really only works generally in religious contexts. And I know that then we take that too far, right? And we ostracize people, but like really.
Or extracurricular context. The thing about like CrossFit.
Yes, they're a family.
But there's there's people go like, well, that's pretty much religious, or like
this is true.
Yeah, I think like trail running communities and stuff like that I've like bumped into and been like, oh, there's a whole world right here of people,
Yeah.
But it's still, it's not natural. You have to like partake in something.
You have to show up, and I was thinking when we were prepping to talk about this, I was like, so Jen, what is like your ideal friendship? Like, what if you could just like craft a friend, create a friend that would feed your soul, what would it look like? And I'd be like, well, we'd laugh. We'd probably have a glass of wine together. And then somewhere in the midst of laughter and goofiness, a little bit of silliness, probably some jokes, and then Jesus would just randomly come up. Like, and then it'd come back to that. And then, and it'd be some kind of comment about like, having a better marriage or, some kind of challenge. I was just in my small group just like minutes ago, we were laughing about how a couple weeks ago, one of them was suggesting that I just kind of like let Sal take lead in something, and we were just cracking up. But she was like, "I saw your face." Like, so like those kind of relationships are what I need, where someone is like, we can tease each other, we can sit and we can laugh together, but we're also pointing each other toward God.
Yep.
And so I think we know if you have to figure out what you need in terms of community. But if you decide, I just don't need community, I think your soul's going to be malnourished.
Yep. And if your soul's malnourished, it's going to come out on the people around you and love relationships that you're in and trying to nurture and grow.
Absolutely. So,
yep. There's the four things.
Love handle number 1 was wonderful.
Yep.
How is it with your soul? Knowing how it is with your soul. When my soul is better, my relationships are better.
Yep.
I love it.
And if people, are going, man, this doesn't feel like a relationship podcast, you are right, because we're really focusing on the person, the individual, the you in the relationship first, because you are the greatest indicator. What you bring into the relationship is the greatest indicator of the health of that relationship.
You're also the only one you can work on.
Yeah, exactly.
I can't work on Sal.
Yep.
Like I keep trying and he doesn't do what I want all the time.
Just keep trying.
I'm going to keep trying.
Yeah. And I think if you feel that way, then you are 100% right. If you're listening, that we've started here in the series, but the next 4 parts of the series are really going to be talking more about, okay, here's the relational components. Now that we've talked about our soul, because if that's not good, the next 4 parts don't really matter. But now that we've talked about the soul, okay, let's get our soul in a good place. Now we can move forward and talk about these relational pieces, these love handles to help us experience great relationships.
Yep. Sounds good. Let's do it.
And you're up for part 2.
I am. You gave me the best love handle ever, but I'm not going to spoil it.
So
it's going to
excited.
be Sunday. I did not pick this topic, just to make that public statement, but I've fallen in love with it. It's been a great topic to research.
I'm very excited. I can't wait to hear you talk about it.
Yes.
It's going to be great.
All right.
All right. Thanks, y'all, for listening and watching. We'll see you Sunday.
All right. Bye.